Welcome, everybody, to the Superfast Instagram Q&A. I hope you enjoy your stay. Superfast Instagram Q&A. This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Why is the bridge to Stella by Starlight so beautiful? Stella by Starlight is a beautiful jazz ballad that just has one of the best bridges I've ever heard. It was originally written for the 1944 film The Uninvited. The original chord progression sounds like this. Check it out. Oh God, just like tug on my heartstrings, why don't you? There's a couple of amazing things about this. First of all, it starts on a dominant seventh chord. Normally in like a 2-5 progression, the dominant seventh chord, the 5 chord, is in a weak part of the harmonic cadence, like the 2nd bar or the 4th bar, and then you'd resolve it to a stronger part in the cadence, like the 1st bar or the 3rd bar. But that doesn't really happen on the bridge to Stella by Starlight. Instead, we start on a C7 chord, and that's a little unusual. It creates a feeling of tension and a feeling like the whole progression will topple forward into the next measure. This whole thing is kind of heightened by the fact that in the orchestration, we have these wonderful schmaltzy Hollywood strings playing the melody in octaves, and then we have this fantastic horn counter melody playing a D flat diminished triad in first inversion, like this. I love horn counter melodies like this. They sound so triumphant. Anyway, this kind of cadence actually has a name. This is an example of a feminine cadence. No, this kind of gendered terminology is not used that frequently anymore, but it used to be the case that composers were criticized for their use of feminine cadences because they were considered weaker than stronger masculine cadences where the 5 chord occurs on the weak beat and the resolution occurs on the strong beat. Like for example, Chopin. His Prelude number 20 starts with a feminine cadence. This G7 right here is on the 3rd beat and then it resolves to a C minor on the 4th beat, which has, as one writer called it, an almost hysterical quality to it. Now, if you wanted to use non-gendered terminology, if you're being, all woke and I just call a chord progression which starts with a dominant 7th chord the Stella cadence, because, Stella. Hey, Stella! Anyway, the C7 has a flat 13 in the melody. It's a big note on top that the strings are playing. And normally that flat 13 would resolve downwards as it's cadencing to an F minor, like this. It's kind of actually how the flat 13 resolves in Chopin's Prelude number 20, except it doesn't do it this time. No, that flat 13 ratchets up the tension by going to the 11 on the F minor chord that precedes it. So far we have this dominant 7th chord unusually in the strong harmonic rhythm, and then the melody resolves in this way that's ratcheting up the tension. Where do we go from here? Well, now the melody goes to an A flat minor major 7. The G in the melody has this pretty intense relationship with the C flat. It's an augmented 5th interval, intense. And from here, you might expect it to resolve to an E flat major chord, the 1 chord, and that's how a lot of jazz musicians do it, but in the original recording, it doesn't resolve to the 1 chord. Instead, it resolves to the 1 chord over its 3rd. So it sounds a little bit unresolved at the end of this phrase. So most jazz musicians play Stella by Starlight based on Miles Davis's recording of the song, which is great, but it's a little bit different from the recording from the movie. It doesn't start on the diminished 7th chord. That's a whole can of worms. Old school jazz musicians will crucify you if you don't start your version of Stella by Starlight with a diminished 7th chord.
In the first place, Stella by Starlight is. That's what it is.
Anyway, there's a lot of great stuff in the original recording, and if you're learning jazz, it's always good to go to the source and learn what made a song great in the first place. And in the case of Stella by Starlight, there's a lot of cool stuff there. G minor 7 over C to F add 9. Okay. If you fade an E in and out at 440 hertz, would you hear the interval that this would produce? Well, let's find out. 440 hertz references the number of times per second something happens. And if we hear something 440 times per second, it equals the note A. Like we hear that as the note A if something happens 440 times per second. Like that's the definition of pitch. So if we play the note E 440 times per second, would it just sound like the note A? Well, let's find out. So I have here the sample of the note E. And if we play it back at quarter note equals 60 BPM, this will be once per second. Sounds like the note E. If we double that up to eighth notes, this will be 2 hertz, or twice per second. Still sounds like E. We can keep that process going. So this is 16th notes, or 4 times per second, 4 hertz. Still sounds like E. This is 8 hertz. Still E. This is 16 hertz. Sounds like a really fast E. This is 32 hertz. It's starting to sound kind of warped, right? This is 64 hertz. Doesn't really sound like an E anymore. This is 128 hertz. Like that's definitely not the note E. That kind of sounds like a C almost. You double it up again to 256 hertz. That's the same C up an octave. And we can tune this note to the note A by speeding up the tempo of Ableton Live. Check this out. So remember, we started with the note E, but because pitch is nothing more than just how many times per second something happens, when we speed it up like that, we now hear the note A. Even though in the sample rack, this is the sample that's being played back. Wild, right? But that's acoustics, that's music. Music and pitch is just how fast something is happening. Why does Jared Yee sound so damn good? That mother practices. Yee! Explain more about 8D music, please. Okay, so 8D music is this fad from a couple of years ago that was essentially binaural audio. You may be familiar with the kinds of microphones that ASMR streamers use that mimic human hearing. Essentially, binaural audio is how we're able to tell where things are in space just by hearing them. Our brains essentially calculate the minor differences in time that it takes the same sound to reach both of our ears. There's a lot of math behind it, and there's some other stuff that happens. I don't pretend to understand any of it, but you can emulate this effect with a free plugin. This is Dear VR Micro. If you're listening with headphones, this is the audio from the beginning. It's now on the right side. It's now on the left side. Now it's going around. This in itself is a total gimmick, but spatial sound and spatial audio is actually kind of a cool thing. Dolby Atmos is now on iTunes. A few bands have remixed songs with spatial audio, but yeah, that's what 8D audio is. It's basically just like fancy panning. What is the flow state and can it be entered on command? So yeah, I kind of understand the flow state to be the time where you're just so engrossed in a creative activity and time seems to stand still and you're just so hyper-focused on doing this one thing. You're kind of like in the flow. I'm not sure if you can like enter it at will, but like my mentor Jim McNeely said, there's nothing quite like a deadline to get the creative juices flowing. And I think just having a deadline is a great way of literally getting into the flow state. I think we really kind of got there when Ben Levin and I did the 24-hour albums where we were writing and recording an album in 24 hours. We really didn't have any time to not be in the flow state. We had to constantly be creating new things and throwing new ideas at each other. Kind of like at will. We had to turn off that judgmental side of our brain just for the sake of practicality. Like we couldn't afford to not create ideas in the moment. Hey Adam, how do you come up with so many different ideas in such a short time? This is like a job. We have to do it. And that hard deadline of 24 hours, I think really helped us get it into the flow state. If you get too caught up in any one little detail, you lose sight of what the big picture is, I guess. So yeah, set deadlines for yourself. There's nothing quite like a deadline to get the creative juices flowing. Any tips for people with perfect pitch? Your video about losing it scared me. So in my video on perfect pitch, I talked about how everybody with perfect pitch eventually loses it as they age. Like by the time you're 50 or 60, you won't have perfect pitch anymore. But you could just as easily say the same thing about your hearing. You know, as we age, we lose our faculties and our hearing goes the same way that our perfect pitch goes. And just being aware of that and being ready for that is just an important part of confronting our own mortality. How to get rid of muscle memory playing and how to get the playing from mind. Okay, so muscle memory is not a bad thing when it comes to improvisation or playing music. You really want to feel the music and use what your body has learned over the course of its study of music to your advantage, because those are all the things that like go into making music. Your body is the thing that actually makes the music. What you don't want to have is what my teacher Dave Liebman called fingeritis. That means your body is like just going on autopilot, and there's this fundamental disconnect between your ear, that thing which gives you the musical inspiration, and your body, which is the thing that's able to execute it. And that back and forth between hearing a phrase and living the phrase through the execution of muscle memory, kind of like the real meat of the matter when it comes to studying music and playing music. Would you use mixo flat 9, flat 13 on a secondary dominant of the two, given that the flat 9 isn't diatonic? All right, so in the key of C, that chord would be an A7 chord. And your question is, should you play a B natural, which is from the key of C, or should you play a B flat, which isn't from the key of C? And the answer is, both sound pretty good if you're playing it in a cadence like this. So, I don't know, pick whichever one makes you happy. Do you see yourself these days as more of a musician or YouTuber? Yeah, I definitely think of myself more a musician than YouTuber. Because I achieved like the tiniest bit of notoriety on YouTube, a lot of people see me as a YouTuber, whatever that is, but that's not really my community, and that's not really how I think of myself. And to be honest, music's just a lot more fun. You know, YouTube's great for connecting with people, and it's a lot of fun making YouTube videos, but honestly, at the end of the day, I just want to sit in a room with other people and play bass. It's really just what I want to do. How does it feel to be finally going places and doing things? Fucking great. What chord sounds yellow to you? Like C major is so yellow to me. Like that right there, that C major is The blue is kind of like a B flat chord in first inversion. It's kind of how I'm feeling it right now. So the whole backdrop is kind of like C going back and forth to B flat in first inversion. What was your favorite ride at Cedar Point? On one of our days off, Sungazer went to Cedar Point and rode a bunch of roller coasters. My favorite, of course, was Millennium Force.
That first drop. That first drop is so nuts.
I may have been a bit of an enthusiast back in the day. Same thing with Sean, by the way.
We can name all of the different manufacturers of all of the different roller coasters in this park.
Right, B&M, Arrow.
Intamin, of course, with the
Millennium Force right over there. What's today's sponsor, Adam? I'm glad you asked. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes to choose from for creative and curious people. Skillshare has many great classes that might appeal to you depending on your skill level and your experience on things like photography, design, illustration, and of course, music. One of these classes, for example, is taught by the memester himself, Charles Cornell, if you want to check that out. Or if that's not your vibe, you could also check out Learn How to Mix Music with Young Guru, a fantastic, clear, and cogent introduction to the wonderful world of audio engineering.
Common things that are on all compressors.
Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, so there are no ads, and they're always adding new premium classes, so you'll always have new things to explore. So if you're interested in Skillshare and are a fan of free things, I got some good news for you, because if you're one of the first 1,000 people to click the link in the description, you'll get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Go check it out if you're interested, and I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day.